Thank you, Mr. President. Once again, Senator Schwertner, HB5 was a bill that was having difficulty gaining enough support to get through the Senate. And you worked hard, speaking with many of us, to add amendments that were critically important for us before we would provide us your support, and you committed to us, and it appears that all the amendments survived the conference committee, but I want to just go over. One of the most important amendments was that the abatements would not be awarded to the entity that, without the determining factor being that one of the biggest criticisms amongst the Chapter 313, its predecessor, was that these were awarded and sometimes stacked on top of other incentives. But this new incentive program, this 403, it has language in there that says, but for not having this incentive, they would not have come here. Did that amendment stay on?
That amendment that has been worked on by numerous stakeholders, Senator Johnson, Senator yourself, obviously others, is in the bill. The but for language, the essentially highlighting that industries want to come to Texas, and there might be a closing argument that needs to be made regarding school tax abatement, and but for that tax incentive, they would not have come. And so that language, which highlights, and again, the comptroller will need to put in rules as they review these applications. That language is in there, and I think it makes the program that much better.
Well, for me, that language is going to be the guardrails, if you will, that we're not just giving away the taxpayers' dollars, the school's dollars, to everybody who shows up at the front door asking with their hand out. That this is not going to be, this will be the deal-making deal. This will be the closing funding to help companies come here with good jobs. One of the things that came in, that came out of our caucus that we discussed, is an importance for us to look at areas in Texas that have chronic unemployment, chronic low wages, maybe a disaster has come through there, that the U.S. Treasury is designated as an opportunity zone, economic opportunity zone. They're designated by the IRS. They're all over the state of Texas. They're in every corner of the state. And that was critically important for many of us because then we would be incentivizing jobs to go where they're most needed. Did that survive the conference committee report, that amendment?
It did, Senator, and those economic opportunity zones, that's a significant differential between the rest of the state and those zones. And those zones are actually quite prevalent in the Rio Grande Valley, in East Texas, and in rural areas of Texas, where there's been not as much of the Texas economic miracle that other areas in urban and suburban areas have experienced. And so the thought is that if we can make an incentive program that drives investment, that drives large industries or even smaller industries into those areas, all the Texans can flourish. And actually with Senator West's input, we highlighted in the application process that those applicants must realize and take into account the availability of an opportunity zone. So it puts it on the front end too, that they realize that there's a differential abatement. I'm sure these very smart CFOs would already know that, but it's also part of the application process.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest criticisms of the Chapter 313 is that they would receive these very long abatements, 100% of the taxes. And when this bill started, it was 100% tax abatement. It's still 50% of what you capped it off at half of what it was originally. Is that correct? Did that survive?
That's right. It's 50% of the M&O in the non-economic opportunity zones, 75%. But again, they're paying their INS still. They're also paying their business personal property tax. And so, I don't, the mathematics of it, anywhere between a 25 and maybe up to a 40% kind of abatement, depending on the school district. But that's of the overall totality of the property tax that is related to schools. So they are still paying, and they're paying more than they used to under the old 313 program. But it is enough probably to generate interest in Texas when it's a closing deal, the but-for language, and one that might, on the margin, incent some businesses to move to Texas that might not have otherwise.
One of the criticisms that governments get is that they attract jobs that aren't improving the community. They don't really make a difference. That we're just still subsidizing them because maybe they don't have benefits, they don't have health insurance, or their wages aren't high enough. In the bill, in the amendment, we amended the bill before it left here to say that the jobs would have a minimum requirement wage of 110% of the average wage for the industry sector, and that they would require health insurance for full-time workers. Did that survive?
That did. The 110% of based upon the Texas Workforce Commission last 4 quarters, I believe, of that particular industry for W-2, not for contract labor. And then also health insurance, the provision or the allowance, I can't recall the exact wording in the bill, but health insurance provision also for W-2 employed individuals, workers.
And in the past, many of these abatements that have come before school boards, and they've gone into executive session, and they're not even named what they are. No one knows ahead of time. Senator Byrd will put on an excellent amendment that would require a minimum 2 weeks notice that the vote had to happen in public in front of a school board, and that the vote would be before the project can advance. So in essence, the school board and the community would have a voice before anything's approved. Did that remain in the bill?
It did, yes. And that was actually highlighted by Senator Eckhart regarding some of the transparency issues and the school districts, how they would handle it and some secrecy. So this improves the overall transparency for the public. It requires a public vote, a public hearing by the school district board of trustees, and the approval of that board to move the project forward.
In the past, in the Chapter 313, one of the huge criticisms were that many times they were approved because the school districts were giving a payment in lieu of taxes, and this was almost an off-the-books payment. So you mentioned it yourself, it really damaged equity in our school districts, because even though they weren't getting taxes, the taxes weren't going through the normal system, so they didn't have any access to recapture. They're just going straight to the school district to do whatever they could. Does the bill eliminate the payment in lieu of taxes provision?
It does. Those supplemental payments, I think, is but payment in lieu of taxes, some people call them kickbacks, are removed. There is a fee that can be set by the comptroller that covers the actual cost of the application process by the comptroller and the school district in reviewing and approving these. Now that fee again is set by the comptroller, not by the school board, and it is these applications can be quite. I've actually skimmed through a number of them now, including the Tesla one and the Samsung one, and there are multi-inches thick applications, and so there is work associated with that. There is legal evaluation of the documents and time and workforce issues that, again, we put the comptroller in charge of setting that fee for essentially reimbursement and backing of the actual costs of the application process. In the past,
the penalties for not meeting these requirements were maybe seen as a cost of doing business, where maybe weren't that impactful. I believe that before this bill, when this bill left the Senate floor, you had doubled the penalties for failing to meet their obligations. Did that remain in the bill?
Regarding the job and wage violations, we doubled them. We also have clawback. We have a certain performance bonding, I believe, in the bill as well. So there are a number of protections, and the governor can rescind an agreement even after approving it at any time. So there are taxpayer protections, and there are protections regarding not meeting the promised jobs and employment that they initially said they would bring to that area.
I appreciate that. That's very important for us to maintain the ability to go back to our constituencies and say that we protected them and protected their tax dollars, especially when it comes to school districts. Early on in this debate, we talked about initially in the bill this is one of the things that was in the initial version of the Senate bill. It had some language that spoke to the economic, social, and governance policies of major corporations. And some of these major corporations, the top S&P 500, 86% of them have ESG language in their books. We removed the language before it left here and left it current law, whatever is in current law. Did it remain that way?
It did, yes, sir.
Appreciate that. So one of the things we added was we broadened the definition of eligible projects to include manufacturing facilities, and we removed corporate relocations because we didn't feel corporate relocations needed a tax abatement to go into an office building. Did that portion of the bill stay the same?
It did, although I personally would have liked to have seen headquartered. We have 54 here in Texas of the Fortune 500. I personally would have liked to incent it more, as I spoke to on the floor here a while back. But that portion of the incentive, the allowance for that incentive, is gone as it left the Senate.
And I share with you that interest in having more of our Fortune 500s relocate here. But fortunately for us, good corporate citizens like Toyota Manufacturing did not need a Chapter 313 to come here, and we have others who haven't. And it'd be hard to make the but-for language on, I think, the determination that you needed to move your corporate headquarters, and if you didn't get this abatement, you wouldn't move it. So that's the good news.
It would have had to have been a different avenue of how to incent that headquarters to move here. You're right.
I completely agree. The one area where I am frustrated in this legislation that we weren't able to get any movement, and I understand why, but I think we found a potential middle ground, is I believe that in this Chapter 403 that's created here, that wind, solar, and batteries will not be eligible for projects in this bill. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator. They are not eligible for the school tax abatement economic incentive program under the renewed 403.
Now, the one thing that you did, and I want to make sure that that's still there, my understanding is that you did include hydrogen energy storage and carbon capture sequestration, that they could qualify if they can meet the standard of the but-for. Is that still in there?
I did, yes. That is in the bill as it passed out of the Senate.
Well, you've done tremendous work to make this happen. There are a lot of groups out speaking about this not being necessary, and they may or may not be right, but at the end of the day, if we can bring jobs that are going to provide 110% above the industry pay in that sector, not the county-wide average that brings in fast food and anything else, what's in that sector with health benefits for a 50% abatement, and they get an incentive to go into areas that are chronically underemployed or unemployed and potentially have a disaster. I think we've struck a balance that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate your hard work.
I appreciate your hard work and your questions, and I think that was very illustrative of the various concerns that this bill, as it came over from the House, and the work that was done in the Senate by all members to fashion a bill that the Senate thought was appropriate, and that we voted off this floor 27-4 initially. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.